All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to your Rules Advisory Committee meeting number 1 for our Division 89 effort. It pertains to general authorizations. Some of you are regular users of those general authorizations. Some of you might be new to this whole concept. So either way, don't worry. We'll talk a little bit about exactly what they are as we go along here. Glad to see so many familiar faces today. My name is Kirk Jarvie. Contrary to popular belief, I am still with the Department of State Lands, although just on a very part-time basis. I retired in 2001, but they've asked me to come back to help lead this rulemaking effort. So again, hello everyone, and thank you very much. I'll also introduce the other members of the DSL team that'll be working with us. First is Danielle Boudreau.
Hello.
Danielle is our rules coordinator, and although she's been with DSL for, hello?
Yep, we're still here.
Question out there? Nope. Okay, I'll keep going. Danielle is relatively new to DSL, but got thrown into the deep end with us and has been working on a whole number of rulemaking efforts. And she'll be guiding us through that rulemaking process to make sure we do it the right way. Also with us is Melinda Butterfield. Melinda is a staff person, aquatic resource coordinator that administers the removal fill law, including general authorizations. And she's here to help me understand proposed changes to the rules and what they might mean to actual practitioners, regulators of that rule as we go along. So I will kick it off to Steve and let Steve introduce himself.
Thank you, Kirk. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Faust. I work for 3J Consulting. I'm a land use planner and public involvement specialist, and occasionally have the opportunity to facilitate a group like this, and very excited to do so. We're going to walk through a lot of the basics today. In just a moment, we'll go through our agenda and protocols, but first, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. So I'll just call folks out one by one according to how they appear on my screen. And a reminder to please, it looks like almost everyone is muted. So when you're not speaking, please do go ahead and make sure you're on mute. So with that, I will start with Andrea.
Good morning, and Kirk, it's so nice to see you. It's been a few years. So I'm Andrea Kloss. I'm the executive director at the Port of the Dalles, but today I am representing the 23 ports that make up the Oregon Public Ports Association.
Welcome, thank you. We'll go to Tim.
Good afternoon. My name is Timothy Sauter. I'm with Washington County, and I'm here on behalf of the Oregon Association of Counties.
Great. Next up on my screen is Rochelle.
Yes, thank you. Rachel Lyon and Kirk, it's good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. I am with Lyon Construction. We are one of those that use the GA process on almost a weekly basis.
Great, thanks for joining us. Tommy.
Hey everybody, I'm Tommy Sanciolo. I work for Trout Unlimited, and we use the general authorizations quite a bit for all sorts of in-stream restoration work. So glad to be here.
All right, Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Brink. I'm a fish biologist with Idaho Power. We do habitat improvement projects in Eastern Oregon and use the GA process for those fish passage projects.
Great, thanks for being here. Lauren.
Hi, Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau. And so we represent the agricultural landowners who sometimes have to use these general authorization permits.
Great. Danielle, I don't know if you saw the chat, but maybe you could get some sort of message out to the whole group, just letting them know it sounds like there's still some folks in the Teams meeting. Apologize for that, everyone, and unintended happening there. Okay, next up, let's go to Sean.
I'll figure it out at some point. I'm Sean. I'm with the Oregon State Marine Board and handle all the permitting for us. So we definitely use this a lot.
Great. John, why don't you go ahead?
John Van Staveren. I am representing for this RAC, the Wetlands Conservancy.
Great. Next up, Drew. You're on mute, Drew.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Probably can't see me. My thing.
Can't see you. Oh, there we go.
Maybe. There we go. Okay. My name is Drew Raby. I am an environmental specialist with CRH Materials. I am new, so I'm excited to learn about this process. But yeah, I'm excited.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Gerber with the Wilbur Island Mitigation Bank, just an interested observer. Thanks.
Thank you. Janelle.
Hi, I'm Janelle Booth with the City of Millersburg, and I was asked by LOC to attend this group.
Thanks for being with us. Chris. Chris Gannon, do you want to go next? Okay, let's go to Dirk.
I'm Dirk Runner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program. I'm also here representing our other programs such as Coastal and Recovery. So thanks for having us.
Yep. Ken. Ken Yates, you want to go next?
This is Ken Yates representing the Oregon Water Resources Congress Irrigation and Drainage and Water Control and Improvement Districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Majidi. I'm the Natural Resource Program Manager for Gresham, but here representing Oregon Aqua, the Association of Clean Water Agencies.
Great. Brad.
Hi everyone, Brad Livingston, Statewide Wetlands Program Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Transportation.
All right, Nancy.
Hi, my name is Nancy Taylor. I'm the Waterway and Habitat Incentives Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'll be representing Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife interests.
Great. Michael.
I'm assuming you're referring to me. So I'm Michael Lambert. I'm the Fisheries Habitat Program Supervisor for the Umatilla Tribes. And at the moment, I'm just an observer listening in and want to understand a little more about the process.
Sounds good. Thanks to everyone for introducing themselves. I realize some people are on the committee and some are interested parties, and we will have time at the end for interested parties to comment, but I don't have the roster in front of me to check. So we're just going to let everyone introduce themselves. Let's go to Brian.
Hello, everyone. Brian Cook. I'm representing Clean Water Services. I manage the capital project permitting program in our organization, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Wonderful. Casey?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Casey Klosterman with CRH, and I and Drew Raby are here representing the Oregon Concrete and Aggregate Producers Association.
Great, thank you. I'm going to loop back to Chris. Chris Gannon.
Yeah, sorry about that. Chris Gannon, Crooked River Watershed Council. I'm the director there. In this capacity, I'm representing about 55 watershed councils across Oregon who are practitioners in conservation and restoration work and use the GA permit process quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's everyone, but if I missed anyone, please speak up now and introduce yourself. Okay, then let's go ahead with the presentation, please, Danielle. All right, we're going to go through our agenda and Zoom protocols. Next slide. So now that we've got through our introductions and we know everyone who's in the room, just in terms of our agenda, as I mentioned in some of our email correspondence, we're going to be going through the basics today. And just a reminder to everyone, if you're not speaking, to please make sure you're on mute. Yeah, please make sure you're on mute. Thank you. After our protocols in agenda review here, Danielle is going to take us through the rulemaking process and the operating principles and the role that all of you play in this process. Then Kirk is going to take us through the rulemaking purpose and scope. And then it'll come back to me. I was going to give a summary of the interviews I've been conducting, but I only have spoke with about 5 or 6 of you. So we're going to save that presentation for the beginning of meeting number 2. But I will walk us through next steps. We'll then open up for RAC member or interested party comments before we adjourn. So that's our agenda for today. In terms of our Zoom protocols, please do raise your hand, preferably the virtual hand, if you want to provide a comment. For those on the phone, you can press *9. I will do my best to call on you in the order which you raised your hand. Again, staying on mute is very helpful unless it's your turn to speak. And just a good general rule of let's all be respectful of each other, and especially in terms of the time we take and being good listeners with each other. So, any questions about today's agenda or those protocols? Not seeing any, I'll hand it over to Danielle to walk us through the rulemaking process.
All right, thank you very much. So the rulemaking process, let me just arrange my screen a little bit better. So the first thing is that the need for rule revisions is established and proposed changes are drafted. The department then convenes a rulemaking advisory committee. During these committee meetings, the draft rules are reviewed and approved. The draft need for the rules, fiscal impact statement, and racial equity statement are reviewed and approved. And those 3 things are needed for the notice of proposed rulemaking, which is published by the Secretary of State in the Oregon Bulletin. So once the RAC has convened, we do publish a notice of proposed rulemaking, which includes those 3 statements as well as the draft rules in a strike-through underline format. And once the notice is published, we have a public comment period that's open for 30 days. And we accept written comments throughout those 30 days. And then a public rule hearing is held approximately 15 days after the notice is published. And during that public rule hearing, oral comments can be made on the proposed rules. So then the proposed rules are presented to either the State Land Board or the department's executive director for final approval. The approval for the general authorizations go to the executive director. And then once the rules are approved, they're filed with the Secretary of State. Are there any questions about the rulemaking process? This was a very high level overview. Okay. So now I'll move into the RAC operating principles and procedures. So the duties and responsibilities of the RAC members are to advise the department on rule amendments to OAR 141-089, which you'll often hear us refer to as Division 89 or just the general authorization rules. The group is an advisory board, and the role is to provide advice and frame policy choices. We expect RAC members to attend and participate in the meetings, to study available information and provide input, and consider a range of issues and options in order to address those, discuss the pros and cons, and seek to develop recommendations. The responsibilities of the members are to review background materials in order to understand the issues for discussion at the meetings, to work collaboratively with one another to explore issues and develop recommendations, and to consider the perspectives and input of other stakeholders and the public, and including those in recommendations as appropriate. So membership and terms of service. The group membership and term of service is at DSL's discretion. Membership is intended to represent a diversity of expertise, skill set, and viewpoints. And members may be represented by alternates, but must provide notice to the rules coordinator, rules writer, or facilitator at least 24 hours before the meeting. So our schedule of meetings, and again, this is a lot of information, but this presentation will be posted on our website and will be sent out to the RAC members by next week. So our first meeting today is we're going to review the RAC role and purpose, the rulemaking process, any background information, and the project purpose and scope. In June, our second meeting, we're going to discuss introductory sections of the rules and proposed GAs for deletion. And Kirk's going to go over more of this later on. And then obviously when we get into those meetings, we'll really get into it. And then our third meeting, we're going to discuss the temporary impacts to wetlands and waterways for certain activities, those GAs, and the minimal disturbance within ESHGA. August 4th, the overwater structures placement removal within ESH and waterway bank stabilization using bioengineering. September's meeting will discuss waterway habitat improvement, GAs, and wetland ecosystem improvement. And then our sixth and last meeting in October we'll be tying up loose ends, and we'll also discuss the draft fiscal impact statement, the racial equity statement, and the need for the rules, that statement that I went over earlier during the rulemaking process. So the department's role is to provide technical and administrative support, information, institutional knowledge and expertise, and advice to the RAC. The department's responsible for scheduling the meetings, preparing the meeting summaries, and maintaining a public record of the RAC process. The facilitator's role is to ensure a safe, welcoming environment where all members can participate, conduct meetings to foster collaborative decision-making and consensus building, distribute meeting summaries that outline the topics discussed, the areas where there is agreement, and any remaining issues on which agreement was not reached. The facilitator will not act as an advocate on behalf of any issue, interest group, or member. And while the facilitator may make recommendations regarding the process, they will not make any substantive decisions. The facilitator will provide coordination between meetings, serving as the primary communicator between RAC members and between the RAC and the department. So information disclosed to the facilitator is disclosed in confidence and will be kept confidential by the facilitator, though written communications may be subject to public records law. RAC members are encouraged to approach the facilitator if or when procedural issues arise. So interested parties, we have a couple of folks on the call today who are interested parties, and these are non-voting meeting attendees. They are invited to observe, but not permitted to participate during RAC member discussion. And they're able to provide a timed comment as time allows after RAC members have concluded business. And at a later date, after the RAC process has concluded, DSL will invite public comments on the proposed rules and will hold a public hearing prior to consideration and adoption. So our operating procedure protocols. Our RAC members agree to act in good faith through all aspects of the RAC process. attend all meetings to the extent possible, or recommend an alternate member, direct any request for information made outside of meetings to the designated contacts, be respectful of other members, interested parties, staff, and members of the public, and make every effort to address their concerns with the group. Members also agree to ensure any written communications regarding the RAC or rulemaking process are mindful of these procedural ground rules and are respectful, even if highlighting different perspectives. Generally, defer to DSL for all media communications related to the group's process and recommendations, and represent only their own perspective in interviews unless otherwise discussed with the group or DSL. And raise all concerns, especially those being discussed for the first time at RAC meetings and not in or through the media. So a consensus model will be used to facilitate decision-making and ensure the RAC benefits from the individual views, experiences, background, training, and expertise of the members. Consensus is a participatory process where the RAC members strive for recommendations that they can accept, support, live with, or agree not to oppose. Expectations for the decision-making process include members agreeing on the value of consensus. The group should strive to achieve it. As such, recommendations will be made by consensus of all present members. Members agree to compromise and work together to find workable solutions and the commitment to achieving consensus. Those with differing recommendations are responsible for proposing alternative solutions or approaches to resolve differences. Meetings will be conducted in a way that fosters collaborative decision-making and consensus building. Members will honor decisions made and avoid reopening issues once resolved. When consensus cannot be reached, the facilitator may invite documentation of differing opinions or viewpoints. So regarding public meetings and records, this meeting is open to the public. RAC meetings are public meetings and are open to the public. And members should be advised that all rulemaking records, including formal documents, rule drafts, meeting summaries, and exhibits, meeting recordings and communications are public records and may be released in response to a public records request. Communications refer to all statements and votes made during meetings, memoranda, work projects, emails, and correspondence, and documents or materials developed to fulfill the goals of rulemaking. All right, and that's my portion. Are there any questions?
Danielle, if I could, I'll just mention that for those who I haven't had a chance to speak to in an interview yet, two of the topics that we cover are the procedure, in case you have any questions about our procedures, and also, Kirk's about to give an overview of the purpose and scope of our work. But if there are any items that you have questions about or comments about in advance of our next meeting, of meeting number 2, the interviews are a good time to raise those, and that way we can prepare in our presentations to respond to those questions and comments and concerns. So just wanted to mention that, since we're not going to get into discussion about the topics today, but you can start to raise any questions or concerns through the interviews.
Thank you. So Kirk, I'll go ahead and turn this over to you.
I think we may have lost Kirk again.
Okay, great.
there's
Thank you,
Kirk. Great.
Danielle. And let me get a check here. Are you hearing me okay? Oh, no.
Yes, we hear you, Kirk. We hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me, Steve?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Okay. My apologies, folks. Great, great. I've got all of a sudden a wonky internet connection. Of course, it would happen now. So I think because of my internet connection, I'm not really connected up to the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm just going to kind of go for it here. So I want to start by providing you kind of an overview, help you understand what exactly is a general authorization and what are we going to be working on here as a group. There was a general authorization fact sheet that I think was emailed to you on the 16th of May. And Danielle, if you're available to put it up on the screen as well, that would be great. So general authorizations. So let me go back kind of to the very beginning on that. Removal fill authorizations generally. When do you need permission from DSL to do work in wetlands and waterways? So it is a three-part test, and all three parts have to be true in order for you to need to come knocking on the door of DSL. First is the activity that you want to do has to be within what we call a water of this state, which is a defined term in statute and rule. And it's the sort of things you might think of. It's perennial and intermittent streams and rivers. It's tidal bays, estuaries, that part of the Pacific Ocean that is owned by the state of Oregon. It's ponds, lakes, reservoirs, and it is wetlands. So any sort of wet or aquatic environment. Second is the activity has to be non-exempt. Statute offers roughly 14 exemptions under the removal fill law. So if you are one of the exempt activities, you don't need to come knocking on our door. And then finally, the activity has to exceed a certain volume threshold. For most wetlands and waterways in the state, that threshold is 50 cubic yards, meaning if you're going to do less removal and fill combined in one of those wetlands or waterways, you don't need a permit from us. So next point is what are sort of the gamut of authorizations that are available if you do go through that test and it's determined you do need a permit. Well, the least, I guess, restrictive would be the no state permit required, what we call an NSP. So it happens quite often that people submit to us an application to do work in a wetland or waterway. And after our review of the application, we determine that they fail some part of that three-part test. We let them know that there is no permit required from us and they're free to proceed, but of course they should check with other regulatory agencies. So that's a very simple process. We always get back to folks within 30 days of their submitting something to us to let them know if they're not going to need anything from us. The next least restrictive permit pathway is the general authorization. It's what we're talking about here. General authorizations use a relatively simple notification form that folks submit to DSL. And we have 30 days to tell them whether they're eligible or not. So it's a pretty quick process that requires fairly basic level of information from the applicant. So things tend to move along quite quickly with the general authorization. Sort of going up that hierarchy is the general permit. General permits are a little more restrictive. Folks use our more detailed application form that requires a lot more information from them. And we have 40 days to determine whether or not folks can be authorized to do their work. General permits do include a public notification process. Finally, the most restrictive permit process we have is the individual permit. That's for any activity that doesn't qualify for general authorization or a general permit. Tend to be more impactful, more complicated sorts of projects. We require the highest level of information from those folks, and that permit process typically takes on the order of 120 days. Just as a heads up, we do have two other sort of oddball permits out there. One is called our emergency permit. We don't issue a lot of them, but there are times and circumstances where there is a threat to public health, safety, or substantial property for which people don't have time for any of our normal permit processes. In that case, they can qualify for an emergency permit, which they can get in as short as 5 days, in some cases as short as immediate, like 1 day or less. We don't really issue more than about 30 or 40 of those per year, most often in the wintertime. Finally is a oddball permit called the permit waiver. Those come up when there is a remedial action, a cleanup effort that's being led by DEQ. So DEQ is in charge of those, so we try and get out of the way as quickly as possible by using what's called a permit waiver process. You'll see that term used a couple of times in the general authorization, so it's just sort of a little heads up for you. I'm going to stop there and just make sure that Steve, can you tell me, are folks hearing me okay?
Yeah, I think unless people are hearing differently than me, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, cool, because my computer keeps telling me it wants to hang up. So I'll keep my fingers crossed. Okay, let's turn our attention now specifically to general authorizations. So by statute, DSL is authorized or is allowed to establish general authorizations by adoption of administrative rule. And we can create these general authorizations under, again, a three-part test. We can create them for activities that are first substantially similar in nature. So a group of activities that share a lot of common characteristics. Secondly, that group of activities can only cause minimal individual and cumulative environmental impacts. And then thirdly, those activities cannot result in long-term harm to water resources. So that's sort of our golden rule. When we look at whether or not we can include an activity in our general authorization rules for sort of that quick pass through the process, we have to run it through that three-part test. GAs can only be used for activities that are specifically described in the Division 89 administrative rule. So if folks propose to us a bank stabilization activity using, say, large wood and organic material, great. That's specifically described in the administrative rule as an allowed activity, and they can continue on through the process. If folks tell us they want general authorization for bank stabilization, but they are going to use rock or riprap, then the use of riprap is not described in Division 89 general authorizations anywhere. So therefore, they cannot use that method to get that quick pass through our permit process. General authorizations cannot be used in state scenic waterways, and that's because we have a separate division of rule that deals with state scenic waterways, and there's a very specific process that has to be followed for evaluating actions in a state scenic waterway. By the way, we do have a map on our website of where the state scenic waterways are located. So if you're curious, you can take a look at that on our website. The other time that GAs cannot be used is if the wetland or waterway meets the definition of an aquatic resource of special concern. Those are defined in Division 89 rules, so you can see them there. On our website, we have a much more detailed description of what they are. There are about, I can't remember if it's 12 or 14 very specific types of waters that are aquatic resources of special concern. We don't run into them very much, but they are either very rare or very sensitive resources that warrant closer scrutiny and closer review than what the general authorization process can give us, since we only have 30 days to make our decision. Eligible general authorization activities are organized into topical groupings. So the current groups are minimal disturbance in essential salmonid habitat, or ESH. By the way, our essential salmonid habitat maps are available on our website, so you can see where all of them are. There are quite a few. So there are a number of activities that you can do that do a very, very small amount of activity in an ESH stream, and for which you can get a general authorization, a quick pass. And by very small, I mean like 4 cubic yards or less of activity. There is a general authorization for piling placement and removal. It's for a very small number of piling, like 5 or less. There is a general authorization if you're only going to be temporarily impacting a non-tidal wetland. When we say temporary, we mean like 2 years or less. There's a general authorization available for stream bank stabilization. So if you have an eroding bank and you're willing to use sort of non-bank hardening methods, like non-riprap methods, you might qualify for that bank stabilization GA. We currently have a transportation related activities GA. It's very, very limited to, I think, about 3 activities. We have a GA that is for removing sediment behind tide gates. It's a very, very specific GA targeted at a very small audience. We have a GA for waterway habitat restoration. So if you want to do 2 good things to improve the health or quality of a waterway, there is a quick path for you to receive authorization. Likewise for wetland ecosystems. If you're going to be restoring or enhancing wetland conditions, you might qualify for that general authorization. And the last one is non-motorized placer mining in essential salmonid habitat. Again, a GA that has a very, very specific and very small audience. Next point is that, and I think it'll be helpful for you to understand that each of our general authorizations for those 9 activities that I just went over, they all have the same structure. They start by talking about what is the purpose of that specific general authorization? What are the eligibility requirements if you want to qualify for it? What exactly are the activities that fit under each of those? And then finally, what are the specific conditions that you'll have to meet when you construct that project? There are also general conditions that apply kind of as a blanket across all of our general authorization activities. So you have to meet both the general conditions that are upfront in the rule, as well as the activity-specific conditions. Many of our authorizations can be combined. We use the word stacked to cover a single project when the combined activities still result in no more than minimal impact. So a great example of that we see a lot is that someone will have a project to do bank stabilization work in a way that qualifies for that GA. But in order to get to that project site, they have to temporarily cross a wetland area. So they can apply for both the bank stabilization GA and the temporary impact GA and just stack them together to get a complete authorization for the project. Authorizations are notice-based. So this is a common misunderstanding among folks. General authorizations, think of them as a permit, When we adopt the Administrative Rule Division 89, we are issuing those permits for those activities. So, and we're issuing them to all the people of Oregon. So if somebody wants to do a project under one of those general authorizations, since the permit is already issued, all they need to do is basically send us a notification letting us know that, hey, I intend to do a project under this or that GA. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's how it meets the eligibility criteria, and here's when I want to do it. And they put that into a notification form. We have up to 30 days to look at that notification. By the end of 30 days, we'll determine one of three outcomes. Either we'll tell the person, yep, your notification was complete. It gave us all the information we needed, and we can tell you that you met all the requirements of rule. You're good to go. You're eligible to use that pre-issued permit. The second outcome is we can't tell because you didn't give us enough information. You didn't fill out all the little information areas on the notification form that you needed to. And we'll tell people in some detail what they still need to tell us to make that determination. Third outcome is, sorry, your project's not eligible. For example, you've proposed to use rocks as part of your bank stabilization project. Use of rocks is not allowed. In that case, we'll give folks the opportunity to either redesign their project so it can qualify for that quick pass GA, or if they don't want to redesign, we'll send them over to our individual permit process and continue them down that pathway. When someone submits a notification to us, there is no public review period, unlike general permits and individual permits, which do have a public review process. General authorization notifications do not have a public review. It's 30 days for DSL. There's also no local land use compatibility review. So local governments are not looking at these in advance. So we always make it a condition of our general authorizations to make sure that they do check in with the local government. Finally, important to know that whatever our decision is on your general authorization, especially if we tell you it's not eligible, that decision can be appealed.
I think we may have lost Kirk.
Yeah, sounds like Kirk. I don't know if you can hear us, but you just cut out.
Deemed eligible, and you can proceed
Kirk?
with your project. Yes.
Kirk, this is Steve. You just cut out for, excuse me, for about 30 seconds. So you might want to go back and repeat what you just went through.
Okay, let's see. So it's probably no public review period for general authorization notifications.
Yeah.
General permits and individual permits do have public review periods. GAs do not. Our decisions are contestable. If you disagree with our decision regarding a general authorization, it is appealed to in a contested case hearing format in front of an administrative law judge. Important to know that if when a GA is submitted, we do have up to 30 days. If we miss that 30-day window, your project is automatically deemed eligible and it can proceed. I guess the good news there is DSL has almost never missed that 30-day deadline. It is a very high priority for staff. So 99.9% of the time, we are going to let you know within that 30 days. There is a fee that's required for some general authorizations when you submit your notification. That fee is established by statute and it is $250. So needless to say, every GA that we process is a little bit of a money loser for DSL. Let's see, once we've told you your project is eligible, you get 3 years to complete that project. You've got to finish it within those 3 years because your GA expires after that, and you cannot renew it and you cannot extend it. So if you don't get that project done in 3 years, you'll need to reapply for another GA. A couple more things. DSL by administrative rule, DSL, ODFW, and DEQ and local governments all have the authority to elevate a project to an individual permit status if they believe the activities fail that any part of that 3-part test for creating general authorizations. So if someone submits a notification to us and we hear from DEQ that, whoa, we think the impacts here are going to be more than minimal for this or that reason, they can tell us that they want it elevated to an individual permit, and we will let the applicant know that they need to move their notification over to our more detailed permit process. Doesn't happen very often, few times a year. DSL conducts annual compliance monitoring for selected groups of GAs. So every year we go out in the field and do a statistically valid survey of the GA's activities that we authorize to make sure that they were done in the way that they were described to us, and to make sure that impacts remained minimal. So because of that, we do have a pretty good track record now in knowing, or we have a high level of confidence that the GAs that we have on the books now are meeting that statutory test by and large. When DSL issues a general authorization or determines that one is eligible, folks always still have to check for local permits, other state permits, and federal permits that might still apply. We cannot issue federal or local authorizations. And finally, GA rules must be reviewed every 5 years by statute, and we can either modify, reissue, or rescind any part of the administrative rule during that 5-year review. And what we're doing now is that 5-year review. Okay, that was the GA fact sheet. Wow, that was a mouthful. I'm going to pause there for a second, check in if there were any questions that folks were trying to ask.
I'm not seeing any raised hands. Oh, Rachel.
Yeah, Kirk, I noticed the 30-day piece, and I believe that's in statute for the 30-day review process for the GAs. Recently, and I don't know if something, we've been notified that it's 40 days now. So I don't, that might be something that this group may, because they're not doing it in 30, it's 40 or 45 now. There was an email that went out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the 30 days actually isn't in statute, oddly.
Okay.
DSL chose to put it in administrative rule for purposes I'll talk about at our next meeting. So it's still in rule. So if we're following rule, it still needs to be 30 days. So I'd be curious to learn more about if the department is saying otherwise. Now, general permits, which are different, those are 40 days. So maybe there's some confusion there, but regardless, Rachel, I'll follow up with staff after this meeting and see if I've missed any internal changes that I need to know about.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, because if that gets confusing for, our committee purposes.
Yeah, gotcha, Rachel. Okay, we'll get back to the whole group on that. Other questions before I move on real quick?
Not seeing any other questions, Kirk.
Okay. Danielle, can you bring up the GA users page? So I put this together. I think it got emailed to folks yesterday. it's just a little FYI piece, just so you can kind of see who are our types of customers for each of our current general authorizations. As I put this together, there were a couple things that sort of jumped out at me, so I won't go over this in detail, but I'll point out a couple what I thought are pretty interesting things. One is the minimal disturbance general authorization. It tends to get used kind of by many different user types. So in that regard, it's a fairly commonly used, fairly popular GA, certainly one that we would want to keep. Our piling GA, this one's interesting. So it is by far our most popular GA. And you'll see there in terms of the user types, 98% of our users are private. And I will tell you that nearly 100% of that 98% is Lyons Construction down at 10 Miles Lake. Hi again, Rachel. Rachel's with Lyons Construction. Lyons Construction is by far the biggest user. There is a lot of small piling project that happen on 10 Mile Lakes in southwestern Oregon. A couple other ones I thought were interesting. Bank stabilization. That one is the most commonly used one by individual property owners. And I guess that's not surprising. Folks that live along streams and rivers often experience bank erosion in some way and are looking to stabilize the bank when it threatens substantial property. So we do see a lot of homeowners apply for that bank stabilization GA. Our transportation GA, you'll see there under state government, close to half, 46% comes from state government. And when I say state government, in this case, it is all ODOT. Very, very popular GA with ODOT. Sediment behind tide gates GA. I mentioned before, this is a very specific one. It is also by far our least used GA. Over the last 5 years, sorry, all this data, by the way, is over the last 5-year period. Only 4 people have used it in 5 years. And in fact, no one has applied for this GA in the last 3 years. At our next meeting, I'll talk a little bit more about that and what we're proposing to do about it. Our waterway habitat and wetland ecosystem GAs are quite popular among our non-governmental organizations. So watershed councils use it a ton. Trout Unlimited is a big user of the waterway habitat GA. Soil and water conservation districts are big users of that GA. Federal government, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, and the like are also big users of it. So again, just kind of an FYI, so you can kind of see who our customers are for each type of general authorization. Any questions on that before I move ahead?
Not seeing any questions, Kirk.
Okay, I will push ahead. If we can go back to the PowerPoint presentation, Danielle. Good, it looks like I'm actually finally synced up with it. This is great. So I wanted to review with you all, just in the spirit of transparency, of course, what DSL's objectives are for updating these GA rules now. Well, perhaps the biggest reason is that statute requires us to review the GA rules every 5 years. And it has definitely been 5 years, maybe a bit more, since we did our last 5-year review. The one that we did about 5 years ago, actually 2018, was a very limited review. Our last really big review, kind of overhaul of the general authorizations, goes all the way back to 2011. Another objective for updating these rules is to incorporate a DSL staff's experience in administering the GAs and the compliance monitoring that they do. Of course, our staff learn a lot about the GAs, kind of where people are getting tripped up on them, what's working well, what's not working well from the regulator's perspective. So last year we went through an exercise of getting all our staff's input on their suggested changes to the rules to make them better for the customers. So we've been trying to incorporate that as well into the draft. We're also trying to incorporate some outcomes from an independent review of our general authorization rule that was done by a Hatfield fellow that we hired way back in 2016. We implemented a few of her recommendations in 2018, but really it's not until now that we're looking back over her recommendations to make some more wholesale changes. Just so you know, we specifically hired her to talk with a broad cross-section of our GA customers and get their reaction, their experience with using our GAs, and from the customer standpoint, where are the pitfalls, where are the problems, what did work well for them. Another thing we want to do is obviously reduce duplication. There's quite a bit of duplicative text, duplicative requirements that were stuck in various places of this administrative rule. I'm a big fan of saying things once in one place, one time. So a bias of mine was to try and weed out a lot of that duplicative text. And we also reorganized some of the activities into more logical groupings. And you'll see that as we get into the detailed review. We've also tried to reflect some of the latest information, latest science, and protection measures into our activity-specific conditions and our general conditions for activities, just to make sure that we're respecting that threshold of no more than minimal adverse effects. Next slide, please. We are looking to expand the number of eligible activities for most GAs. Our staff has told us in their review or their application of the GAs that they felt that there were some activities that right now we're going through our very detailed permit process that might be better handled under our more streamlined general authorization process, because they are predictable, because the effects are generally very minimal. So we've brought some of those activities and pulled them into, proposed to put them into the GA. We're proposing to remove some activities that just no one's ever applying for. No one's using it. If no one's using it, why keep it in there? Another objective is to increase consistency with staff guidance and practice that has evolved since our last rulemaking. So I'll explain this one by example. So we have that piling GA if folks want to drive small amounts of piling. Well, shortly after we issued, actually a couple of years after we adopted that rule to create that GA, ODFW came out with guidelines for residential docks in Oregon. And it's information that really would have been great to have in our administrative rule for the piling GA. But we weren't in a place to reopen the rulemaking. So basically we had staff memos on memos to staff describing how they should use the ODFW residential dock guidelines when they're evaluating a piling GA. So now we're going back and doing what we should have done all along and incorporate that guidance memo into rule. We want to fix the double bind problem with the fish passage law. Double bind's the wrong word there. My apologies. I think the better term is is probably the chicken and the egg problem. People are always struggling. Do I get my fish passage review before I apply for my GA? Or do I wait until I get my approval from DSL? Then do I go get my fish passage compliance from ODFW? So we've attempted to solve that question through this rulemaking. And finally, and of course, objective is to use a rules advisory committee to obtain input on our proposed revisions. So I'll move ahead to the next slide. So at the highest level, we have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4. Well, it says 4 here. Okay. So highest level, our proposed changes include a few things. We are proposing to remove the certain transportation activities general authorization, which I know right now is grabbing Brad from ODOT's attention. He's probably saying, huh, what? So our next meeting, Brad, we're going to go into detail about why we're proposing to do that and how those activities that are covered now will continue to be covered under a GA in the future, and even add a few more activities that we think will be helpful to ODOT. We're proposing to remove that sediment behind tide gates general authorization. It's just no longer used anymore. There are other better permit pathways for folks to use if they want to do that kind of work. We'll talk more about that at our next meeting and why we're proposing that and get your feedback. We've updated the general conditions that apply to all activities, as well as the activity-specific conditions for each GA. And we've added more eligible activities to the minimal disturbance general authorization. We've also increased the allowed volume for many activities. Right now, it's limited to 4 cubic yards, and we're proposing to increase that for some activities. Next slide, please. There's the rest of them. We've expanded the temporary impact in wetlands GA to also proposing to allow some temporary activities in waterways and to include tidal waterways as well. We're proposing to reorient our piling GA into an overwater structures GA. What we've come to learn in one of the things we've come to learn in running these GAs is that while the driving of piling certainly has effects to the waterway, the bigger long-term effect is really what's attached to the piling. What is the nature of that thing that is attached to the piling? So we've sort of reoriented the GA to focus more so on the dock itself. We've added more eligible activities under the waterway habitat GA to kind of promote or help foster more habitat improvement activities. Same with the wetland GA. And then finally, just some sort of housekeeping, editing, cleanup language, fixing some grammar and smaller things like that that have always been just kind of an annoyance to us. So that at the highest level are the proposed changes that we're looking at. Over the course of our next 5 meetings, we'll drill into a lot more details on each of those bullet points. And my last slide, please. Okay, so what will we not be addressing through this rulemaking effort? So we are not going to talk, well, we can talk about it, but we're not going to make any edits to the non-motorized placer mining in ESH general authorization. The reason why we're not tackling that is there is a very specific statute, Senate Bill 3 from 2017, that really drives this general authorization and what's behind it. Our customers for this GA are a very, very small and very, very focused group. So should we ever do rulemaking for that GA, it would be, we'd have a very different Rules Advisory Committee makeup to do that. So we're going to take that one off the table for now. While I will talk to you a bit more about the fees, what we cannot do is change the fee structure because right now it is set by statute. We're not going to tackle anything in Division 85. Division 85, just so you know, talks about jurisdiction under the removal fill law. So that 3-part test that I talked about a while ago. Division 85 lays out those 14 exemptions that I mentioned. It talks about the individual permit process. It talks about emergency permits. It talks about mitigation, wetland banking, and removal fill enforcement. So we won't be changing anything in rule about those things. Division 90, we just finished a rulemaking effort for that, wetland determinations and delineation. So this group will not be dealing with that. We'll not be dealing with Division 93, general permits. I talked a bit about those. That's our 40-day permit process. Division 100, removal fill permits and state scenic waterways, off the table. And finally, Division 102, which talks all about how do we officially designate essential salmon habitat waterways and how do we adopt those maps. That is done by a separate rulemaking effort. So that is it for today. I know I hit a lot of points there at kind of a high level. Rest assured, over the next 5 meetings, we'll get into some gory detail on all of those. So before I turn it back to Steve, I'll do one last check-in for any questions.
Any clarifying questions? Like Kirk said, we're going to go into a lot more detail, but happy to clarify any confusion at this time. Kirk, I'm not seeing any hands.
Okie doke. We're going to get him out of here well before 3 o'clock.
There you go. Okay, so in terms of summary and next steps, I was going to go through the results of the interviews I've conducted, but as I stated earlier, I think I'll wait until our meeting number 2. I will say one of the things that I've been asking as well is whether people plan or prefer to participate virtually versus in person, so we can decide what the format of the rest of the meetings is going to be. Yeah, just another thing to be thinking about. So I think I sent this out in an email, but here's a slide with the future dates and times of our meetings. Next one, June 22nd, all meetings at 1 o'clock and assume about 3 hours. So June 22nd, July 20th, August 17th, September 14th, and our final meeting on October 19th. So please hold those dates and times in your calendars. And, you know, things may arise where we need to shift a meeting, but we thought it was best to just get these meetings and specific meeting dates and times in everyone's calendars now.
Real quick. I'm going to send out the June meeting invite within the next couple of days. And then possibly after I send that, the June one, maybe a day or so later, send the rest of the meeting, the calendars, so that it's already on people's calendars.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that, Danielle. We will be following up by sharing a link to, you know, for this meeting and all of the future meetings within a few days. We'll follow up with a link to the recording and additional materials that came out, and then eventually meeting summaries as well, meeting notes for you. We have a couple agenda items left. One is, again, are there any questions from RAC members, comments that you'd like to share at this time? And I'll extend that same invitation to our interested parties. Are any of our interested parties have any questions or comments for Kirk or me or anyone else?
Steve, my only comment would be is that I assume as we walk through the changes later, these references for the initiative to do this would be more fully clarified. For example, there was a Hatfield research piece and then some other generic statements about departmental wishes, if you will. So I think people are being quiet, assuming that you will explain those or the team will explain those in more detail as we walk through the changes.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah. Thank you, Casey. Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into some pretty gory detail about what exactly those proposed changes are, whether they were coming from staff, customers, or Hatfield fellow, whatever the case. We're going to really drill into the detail on those over the next 5 meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Casey. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions at this time, we'll look forward to seeing you on June 22nd and are happy to adjourn this meeting early. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to continued work with you over the next 6 months or so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.